One of the most sad and tragic news stories we've heard in a while this week. Two young boys, aged 9 and 11, found dead in a Blue Mountains home by their dad after allegedly being murdered by their mother. We don't report crime news on this show, so we'll leave all of that to the mainstream media, but this is a horrible tragedy, and it may have many, many complex reasons behind it. What I do want to focus on, and couldn't help but notice, is the fact that this has not unleashed a wave of calls for all women to collectively check themselves and apologise for family violence against men. It has not unleashed hundreds of millions of dollars in government funding to organisations tasked with protecting men from female violence. And nor should it. That would be absurd. But so is it just as absurd that every time a man murders a woman in a domestic setting, we get the wider narrative of all men needing to atone for their toxic masculinity. Crimes aren't committed by genders. Crimes aren't committed by men or women. They are committed by people, sick people or evil people. And the gendering of crime, in order to feed an identity politics divisive narrative of fake sexism, so that politicians like Albo can look all sensitive and caring, and social organisations peddling left-wing narratives of hate and division against straight white men can get funding. Yes, I just said the quiet part out loud. And as you'll see in a second, I'm not the only one noticing. But first, a recap. A few months ago, we reported on the crime stats on this show, and the data simply does not support the narrative being shoved down our throats by the ABC and the rest of the left-wing media and all the bureaucrats and all the activists that the problem of intimate partner homicide is getting worse. It isn't. Or that all men are somehow to blame. They aren't. Or that Australia has any kind of toxic male cultural problem. It doesn't. The latest homicide data from the Australian Institute of Criminology showed, when it was released back in May, this is the rate of homicides in Australia per 100,000 people from 1989 on the left of the chart to 2023 on the right. Back in 1989, you had a 1.8 in 100,000 chance of being murdered in this country. Today, it's less than half that. Half. That's massive, and we should be celebrating it. Between the 1st of July 2022 and the 30th of June last year, there were 232 homicides, giving us a rate of 0.87 per 100,000. But what about domestic violence-related homicide? What about intimate partner homicide, the radical feminists will argue? Surely that's gone up. We all know that. I mean, well, actually, no. Homicides are classified into domestic, meaning an intimate partner, a relative or someone living with you, acquaintance, meaning someone you know not living with you, and a stranger. This chart shows all three types, and the rates from 1989 to 2023 for each type. The dark green line is domestic. The light green line is acquaintance. They have both dropped massively since 1989. The rate of domestic homicide in 2022-23 was 0.3, and the acquaintance homicide rate decreased to 0.24, the lowest since 1989, when it was 2.5 times that. As you can see from the grey line at the bottom, the type of homicide that hasn't dropped is stranger homicide. And the victims of stranger homicide are significantly mostly men. It's probably the gender of the victims. That must be where women victims are on the rise. Oh, no, that's also falling. Most victims of homicide in Australia are still male. In 2023, male victims were 69% of homicides, 171 out of the 232 murders overall. That puts the male victim rate at 1.29 per 100,000, and the female rate is at 0.56, well less than half. And over time, it's just more really good news. Since 1989, the rate of male victimisation halved, and the rate of female homicide victimisation decreased by more than half at 58%. Okay, well, that was from our show back in May. Cognitive dissonance, anyone? Feeling a little bit sceptical? It's weird, isn't it? When you see the actual data, it makes you shocked to realise that you've been lied to for so long, the victim of a an actual PR campaign and an industry, if you like. Big government likes creating industries and bureaucracies. But as I said, we're not the only ones noticing.
Australian men are getting screwed in every way except the way they'd really like.
That's Bettina Arndt speaking at the recent Restoring the Presumption of Innocence conference in Sydney.
Sex has become such a battleground. We're absolutely weaponised against men. Women are taught to see themselves victims, cowering from dangerous men. In New South Wales at the moment, the sex most people have most of the time is now illegal. We have affirmative consent laws, which means that if you've been married for 20 years, it is illegal for you to make love to your wife without checking every inch of the way for affirmative consent. Can I nibble your ear, dear? May I pull down your trousers? We don't do that in our normal relationship, and yet zealots have marched into our bedrooms wearing jackboots and declared that is how we should behave. What we're seeing in Australia now, sexual consent is being taught in all our schools, teaching girls that boys are all potential predators. And as a result of that, we've seen a huge spike in sexual assault cases flooding into our courts.
Of course, the rise in the number of sexual assault cases in courts is used as an evidence point by the activists that a growing problem exists. Look, the number of cases is rising. There must be a growing problem. But it seems, looking at the data we just showed you, that the problem is getting better and the impression of a growing problem has been created.
Think about what happens to a man who's been accused of this sort of a crime. He's publicly named and shamed. They lose their careers, their reputations, their friends. Their families often spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend these cases. We've got people in this room today whose loved ones have been through this sort of dreadful ordeal or who've been through it themselves. And every week I hear from dozens of these people and it breaks my heart. We're in the grip of a moral panic, an orchestrated campaign to create hysteria about women not being safe. And it's absolutely a feminist campaign. It's part of a long-running attack on male sexuality. The 19th century suffragettes had a slogan, votes for women, chastity for men. I mean, think about that craziness.
Bettina Arndt speaking at the recent Restoring the Presumption of Innocence conference in Sydney. The feminists, the radical crazy ones, tried to shut the conference down but had no luck. Good. As we approach the election, you'll see the old narrative re-emerging now. Albo will be falling over himself backwards to look like the man who understands, the ally of the feminists. He'll be manipulating the more gullible women voters into voting Labor and painting Peter Dutton and the Liberal Nationals yet again of being a pack of misogynists, blah, blah, blah. Watch out for the, quote, the Liberals have a women problem narrative, 2024-25 version, coming to a TV screen near you soon. This stuff never gets tired for the left. The same old tricks, division, identity politics, rehashed every election. This time, we need to call it out. The coalition needs to just call it out, not cower in terror from the feminazis and their beta male allies. There's absolutely huge money in this game. The so-called National Cabinet meeting this week, the meeting of the Prime Minister and the Premiers and Chief Ministers of the Territories, announced a, sit down, are you sitting down? Okay, $4.7 billion with a B dollars plan to combat domestic violence. That's 4,700 times $1 million of your money if you happen to be a taxpayer. Wow. To combat something that actually isn't getting worse, according to the actual real world data. It's incredible. And the PM was all over it, even telling male journalists to take a back seat at the National Cabinet News Conference, as Sky News' Denica DiGiorgio reported this week on the Prime Time show.
Today, the Prime Minister announced a $4.7 billion plan to address domestic violence at today's National Cabinet. But there was an odd moment in his press conference which struck my attention when he was picking which journalists to go for. This is what he said.
Just in front of you.
I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm deliberately going to women before blokes.
Prime Minister.
You know, Tina, so he's deliberately going to female journalists over male journalists, assuming because this was a domestic violence announcement. I mean, I think this is ridiculous. It's virtue signalling at its finest. Who is he trying to please here?
Oh, it infuriates me. And if he thinks he's going to get the female vote by doing that, he won't, because women do not appreciate it. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the money they're throwing at domestic, money isn't going to solve the issue. You know, a lot of these domestic violence start in homes where there is struggling with their house payments, those very issues we discussed in the first part of the program. So try and fix those, and maybe that'll alleviate some of the problems. And also don't forget, a lot fewer men, but men can be victims of domestic abuse as well.
Yes.
It's a very complex issue, and to do that is just a disgrace, and it's not going to win him any favours with the female voters of Australia.
Well, I really hope Tina McQueen is correct there in those comments on Sky News, but I'm not so sure. This cheesy stuff works. There's a lot of very stupid people out there that don't dig beneath the surface of anything that's being thrown at them. And that's why the left keep doing this stuff. Never let a little thing like the facts and reality get in the way of an excellent political narrative and $5 billion of taxpayer funding. Did you know that for roughly every 2 nurses in Australia working hard to save lives and take care of the sick on the front line, there's 1 taxpayer-funded bureaucrat sitting behind a desk doing admin and making and enforcing rules and regulations? That's right, nearly 1 bureaucrat for every 2 frontline nurses. In most countries, it's 1 bureaucrat for 10 frontline nurses. That's how bloated our public service has become. But you'll never hear about it from the regular nurses' unions because they also represent many of those public servants. So says the leading alternative nurses union in Australia, the NPAA. If you're a nurse, it's time to change to a union that will not only look after you without using your money to support the Labor Party, but which is taking on the government health systems to sidestep the bureaucrats and use the savings to pay all nurses 25% more. That's what they want to do. The current waste has got to stop. All the red tape doesn't just suck up resources and time, it actually means that the nurses left on the front line have got to jump through more hoops, and it stops them from being able to do their jobs properly. Admin is a hindrance. So join the union that will actually stand up against bloated government. Join the NPAA, the Nurses Professional Association, will make hospitals locally autonomous and run by elected boards. To find out more, just Google NPAA. The NPAA's fees are half the price because none of your money goes to any political party. And as an Other Side viewer, if you use our special code OTHERSIDE1 when you sign up, you will get the first 3 months free or $100 off your annual payment. Go to npaaredunion.com and sign up now for a better union and support the other side too by supporting our sponsors. Thank you, nurses, you legends. If you like that clip, there's more where that came from in our full show, The Other Side. You can watch it right here, the latest episode. And please subscribe to our channel by pressing the subscribe button right here or down here. And remember to click that notification bell too. It all helps. Join us and become part of The Other Side.